My son told me he could never be a father. But when my daughter-in-law returned from her office tour, she was pregnant. When I saw her standing in the crowd that morning, the sunlight catching the pale blue of her dress, I felt my breath stop for a moment. It wasn't the color that caught me. It was the curve. Small, gentle, undeniable. A bump, resting beneath her folded hands. The kind of bump she once cried over, saying she could never have. They called my son's name over the loudspeaker. Congratulations to the graduating class of 2024. And everyone around me cheered. I clapped too, because that's what mothers do. But inside, I went completely still. I wanted to believe my eyes were wrong, that it was just the fabric or the way she stood. But when she turned sideways to hug him, that soft curve pressed against her dress like a truth she could no longer hide. The flowers in my hands suddenly felt heavy. All the months I'd prayed for her, comforted her, paid their bills, whispered to myself that maybe a miracle could still happen. And now right here, in front of the whole world, the miracle was standing before me. Only it didn't feel like grace. It felt like betrayal. For a second I almost laughed. The kind of laugh that trembles before turning into a sob. But I swallowed it, smiled for the cameras, and clapped until my palms burned. No one could see that inside me something had cracked. After my husband died 5 years ago, my son Caleb had been the only piece of light that kept me from drowning. When he met Alyssa, I tried to love her the way a mother should love the woman who makes her son happy. She was soft-spoken, polite, always careful with her words. The kind of girl you'd call gentle. The first time she came to our home, she brought me tulips. "Your house feels so warm," she said, looking around my kitchen. And I remember thinking how lovely she'd look there. Years later, maybe with a baby on her hip, laughter in her voice. I let myself dream that dream. 2 years into their relationship, they sat me down at the dining table one evening. Alyssa's hands were clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white. Caleb's eyes wouldn't meet mine. He cleared his throat and said quietly, "Mom, we've been trying, but Alyssa can't have children." Her voice trembled when she added, "The doctors said it's impossible. Something about my lining, I can't carry a baby." Tears spilled down her cheeks, and I reached across the table to hold her hands. "Sweetheart," I told her, "that doesn't make you any less of a woman." She broke into sobs, and Caleb pulled her close. I remember feeling proud of him that night, proud of how kind he was, how gentle. We spent hours talking about adoption, treatments, hope, and when they left, I sat alone at that table for a long time, whispering prayers for both of them. If I had known then what I know now, I might have noticed how tightly she held on to those tears, how she looked at my son, not for comfort, but for permission. In the months that followed, I helped them however I could. They were still finishing school, working long hours, barely keeping up with rent. I covered a few bills, brought groceries, even paid the down payment for their car. Caleb hated asking for help, but I told him, "Families don't keep score." And Alyssa always thanked me, with muffins, flowers, little notes that said, "You're the mother I never had." I'd smile, fold them away, and tell myself that kindness would come back around someday. It was early March when something small began to feel off. I stopped by their apartment with a pot of chicken soup, unannounced. Alyssa opened the door in an oversized sweatshirt, her hair tied up messily. "Oh, Mrs. Turner, Caleb isn't home," she stammered. "That's all right," I said. "You look flushed. Are you feeling okay?" She hesitated, forcing a smile. "Just tired. School's been a lot." Behind her, I caught the faint scent of ginger and lemon. On the counter sat a small bowl of crackers. It reminded me of the mornings when I was pregnant with Caleb, how ginger tea kept the nausea away. I asked nothing. I told myself I was imagining things. Later that week, they came for dinner. Alyssa wore a long, flowing dress that brushed her ankles, even though it was warm outside. She said she'd been getting dizzy spells. Caleb said she was studying too much. I watched her carefully. When she thought I wasn't looking, her hand rested against her stomach, lightly, protectively. Still, I ignored it. Mothers want to believe their children's worlds are honest ones. Denial can be a kind of mercy. The day of graduation arrived like a celebration we'd all been waiting for. I baked Caleb's favorite chocolate cake the night before, wrapped his father's old watch as a gift, I wanted him to feel that his dad was there with him somehow. The auditorium was crowded with proud families and flashing cameras. I found my seat, clutching a bouquet of lilies, and waited for their names to be called. Then Alyssa appeared beside him, her hand looped through his arm. Her face was glowing, her smile wide, too wide. And then that curve, that impossible, beautiful curve under her dress. My fingers went numb. The noise around me faded into a distant hum. Everything they'd told me, everything I'd believed, shattered in one heartbeat. When the ceremony ended, Caleb came running over, still in his cap and gown. "Mom," he said, grinning. "We did it!" He hugged me so tightly that I could feel his heartbeat against my chest, and then Alyssa joined him, her hands still resting over her stomach. "Congratulations," I said softly. My voice sounded strange, like it belonged to someone else. "You both look happy." Her eyes met mine for just a second, and I saw it. The flicker of fear. The silent plea not to say anything there. Not in front of him. I smiled, pretending nothing had changed. Because if I didn't, I might have fallen apart right there in the middle of that crowded campus. That night, back home, I sat alone at my kitchen table. The clock ticked louder than usual. The cake sat untouched. I replayed every word, every tearful confession, every moment I had looked at that girl and seen a daughter. Had they laughed at me behind my back? Had Caleb known? The questions came faster than I could breathe. By midnight, I finally picked up my phone, my hands trembling. I typed 4 words. "We need to talk." The morning after graduation, I woke up with that same hollow ache in my chest, the kind that feels like someone's name caught in your throat, refusing to leave. The flowers from the ceremony were still sitting in the kitchen sink, their stems half floating in cloudy water. The petals had already begun to wilt, folding into themselves like they were tired of pretending too. I made coffee but couldn't taste it. Every sip felt bitter, not from the beans, but from what had settled inside me overnight. The message I'd sent Caleb, "We need to talk," had been seen. But there was no reply. By afternoon, I'd rewritten that text in my head a dozen times. "We need to talk about Alyssa. I saw something. Please don't lie to me." Each version sounded more desperate than the last. In the end, I didn't send another word. Around 6 p.m., the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, Caleb was standing there, still in the same jeans from last night, hair uncombed, eyes wary. He held a paper bag of leftovers. "We brought you dinner," he said quietly. Alyssa made lasagna. The air between us was thick, polite words hanging like smoke before a fire. "Come in," I said. He stepped inside, setting the bag on the counter. I noticed how he didn't meet my eyes. The small things always give guilt away. "Where's Alyssa?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "She's in the car," he said. "Didn't think you'd want to see her yet," I swallowed. "That was thoughtful of you." Silence settled between us, heavy and sharp. Only the clock ticked, that old one above the fridge. Ticking the same way it had through every phase of our lives. Birthdays, funerals, arguments, forgiveness. Finally, I asked the question that had been burning through me since yesterday. "Caleb, is she pregnant?" His jaw tightened. He didn't answer right away, and that pause said more than words ever could. "Mom," he began carefully, "we were going to tell you. We just wanted to wait until after graduation. We didn't want to distract you from—" "Don't." I cut in softly. "Don't make this about me," he sighed, rubbing his face. "I didn't mean it like that. How long have you known?" He hesitated. "A few months." I took a deep breath. "And when exactly were you planning to tell me? Before or after I spent half my savings helping you both get on your feet?" He flinched like I'd slapped him. "It wasn't like that. We were scared, Mom." "Scared of what? That I'd be angry you're having a child?" I asked, voice rising despite myself. Or scared that I'd remember the night you both sat in my kitchen crying, swearing she couldn't have one. He looked at me then, really looked at me. And I saw it. The guilt, the shame, and something else underneath. Fear. She lied to me, I whispered. He didn't deny it. The next few seconds stretched forever. I pressed my hand to the counter to steady myself. Why? I asked finally, the word barely leaving my throat. Why would she lie about something like that? He swallowed hard. Because she didn't think you'd approve of me marrying her if you knew. I frowned. Approve? What does her fertility have to do with my approval? He hesitated. Mom, before the wedding, when we were talking about our plans, you said something about how excited you were to have grandkids. You said, I closed my eyes. I remembered. I'd said it so carelessly. I can't wait to hold your little one someday. It had been meant as love, not pressure. He continued, voice breaking. She thought if you knew she was pregnant before graduation, you'd think she trapped me. She wanted you to respect her. I shook my head. Respect her? She built our entire relationship on a lie. Mom, she was scared. She was calculating. He winced. That's not fair. Fair? I laughed bitterly. You think any of this is fair? She lied and you let her. He looked small then. Not like my grown son, but the little boy who used to hide behind me when he broke a window. I didn't know how to tell you, he whispered. I thought maybe once the baby came you'd forgive her, I repeated softly. You can't ask for forgiveness before you've told the truth. The sound of a car door closing outside made us both turn. Through the window, I saw Alyssa walking up the path, holding her belly, the way women do when they've finally accepted that they're carrying life. I felt my throat tighten. When she stepped inside, her smile was tentative. Mrs. Turner. I didn't speak. She looked from me to Caleb, her voice trembling. I told him not to come. I didn't want things to get ugly. They don't have to, I said, my tone even. As long as you tell me the truth. She nodded slowly, setting her purse down. Her eyes were glassy, full of tears she was trying not to let fall. I didn't lie to hurt you, she began. I lied because I was ashamed. Ashamed of what? Of being pregnant before marriage. Of not being enough. Of feeling like if you knew, you'd think I'd ruined his future. Her words came out fast, desperate, fragile. I grew up being told a woman who gets pregnant without a plan is a disgrace. I didn't want to be that woman to you. I folded my arms. So instead, you became the woman who lied to me. She looked at the floor. I know, and I'll never stop regretting it. Caleb reached for her hand, but she didn't take it. The silence after that felt suffocating. Finally, I said quietly, I don't hate you, Alyssa, but I don't trust you either. And right now, I don't know how to. Her tears spilled freely now. I don't blame you. For a long moment, none of us spoke. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the faint whistle of the kettle on the stove. I poured myself a cup of tea just to have something to do with my hands. You've both made choices, I said softly. And choices have consequences. I can't undo what's been done, but I can decide what comes next. Alyssa looked up. Please, don't push us away. I met her eyes, and for the first time, I saw something genuine, not fear, not manipulation, just regret. I sighed, exhaustion washing over me. I'm not pushing anyone away, but from now on, the truth comes first. Always. She nodded, crying silently. Caleb exhaled, relief flickering across his face. Thank you, Mom. I didn't answer. I just turned toward the window. Outside, the last of the sunlight had faded, and the streetlights had begun to glow, one by one. And in that quiet, I realized something. This wasn't just about lies. It was about how easily love can turn into protection, and how protection, when rooted in fear, can destroy everything it tries to save. When they left that night, I stood by the door long after their car disappeared down the street. For the first time in years, I felt like a stranger in my own story. A week passed after that night, but the house still smelled faintly of Alyssa's perfume, that soft vanilla scent that lingered long after she'd gone. I kept telling myself that I'd done the right thing. I hadn't yelled. I hadn't cursed. I'd chosen dignity over anger. And yet, every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, tear-streaked, trembling, and heard the same question echo in my head. Please, don't push us away. I wasn't sure if I had. I tried to fill my days with small distractions, gardening, sorting through old letters, baking pies for the church charity drive. But the truth has a way of humming quietly in the background, no matter how loud you turn life's volume up. On the 5th day, Caleb called. "Hey, Mom," he said, voice hesitant. "Can we come by this weekend?" I hesitated. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" "I think it's time. Alyssa wants to apologize properly." A long silence followed. I stared at the window, at the reflection of my tired face. "All right," I said finally. "Sunday, around 3. Sunday came with the smell of rain in the air. I baked a pie, not because I wanted to, but because I didn't know what else to do with the hours. When they arrived, Alyssa was wearing a soft beige cardigan, her hair pulled back neatly. She looked fragile but calmer, like someone who'd rehearsed peace. Caleb kissed my cheek. "You look nice, Mom." "Thank you," I said. "Tea." They nodded, and we sat around the kitchen table like nothing had ever happened. 3 people pretending to remember how to breathe the same air. Alyssa was the first to speak. "I wanted to say I'm sorry," she began softly. "For lying to you, for hurting you." Her voice cracked. "I wasn't raised to lie. My parents were strict, religious. I grew up afraid of disappointing people. When I found out I was pregnant, I panicked. I didn't even tell Caleb at first." I frowned slightly. "What do you mean you didn't tell him?" Caleb shifted in his seat, eyes fixed on his tea. Alyssa looked at him, then back at me. "He didn't know for almost 2 months. The words hit me like a slap." "You didn't tell your husband?" Her lower lip trembled. "I was afraid. He was finishing his thesis, so stressed all the time. I thought it would ruin his focus. So I hid it." I turned to Caleb. "Is that true?" He hesitated, just long enough for the silence to confirm it. "Yes. She didn't tell me until the 2nd trimester." I stared at him. "And you're okay with that?" He sighed, rubbing his forehead. "Mom, it was complicated." I leaned back in my chair, studying them both. Complicated is when someone's car breaks down. This is deceit. "Please don't make it sound ugly," Alyssa said quickly. I looked at her, steady but cold. "Sometimes things are ugly, Alyssa. Dressing them up doesn't change the truth." Caleb reached across the table, his voice quiet but pleading. "Mom, we've moved past it. We're focused on the baby now." The word baby lingered between us like a forbidden note. For a moment, I softened. I wanted to ask about doctor visits, names, how far along she was, but then something tugged at the edge of my mind, a small, uneasy detail I hadn't questioned before. 2 months. She hadn't told him for 2 months, which meant when she told me about being infertile, she might have already known. The realization hit me hard enough that I nearly forgot to breathe. "You said 2 months?" I asked carefully. Alyssa blinked. "Yes," I nodded slowly. "So when you both came over that night to tell me you couldn't have children?" Her eyes widened slightly. "You already knew, didn't you?" Caleb tensed. "Mom," I raised a hand. "Don't let her answer." Alyssa swallowed hard. "I wasn't sure then. I'd missed 1 cycle, maybe 2. I thought it was stress." My heart pounded in my chest. "You sat in my kitchen crying, Alyssa. You let me comfort you while you lied straight to my face." Tears welled up in her eyes again. "I was scared." "You keep saying that," I whispered. "But you weren't scared enough to tell the truth." Caleb slammed his hand lightly on the table. "Mom, please. You're not helping anything." "Helping?" I said softly. "Do you know what I did that night, Caleb? I stayed up praying for you both. I cried because I thought my son's wife was broken-hearted. But she wasn't barren. She was lying." He dropped his head into his hands. "This is going nowhere." I stood up, too restless to sit still. "You're right. It's not going anywhere because neither of you knows what honesty looks like anymore." Alyssa began to sob quietly, her shoulders shaking. For a moment, I almost reached out to her. That motherly instinct that refuses to die, no matter how betrayed it feels. But then, through her sobs, she whispered something that froze me completely. I didn't even know if it was his. The room went silent. Caleb's head jerked up. "What?" Alyssa's face went pale, her hands covering her mouth like she wished she could pull the words back in. "Oh God," she whispered. "I didn't mean to say that." But it was too late. Caleb stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor. "What do you mean you didn't know if it was mine?" I made a mistake," she stammered. "It was before we were married. I thought we were over, Caleb. You'd stopped talking to me for weeks, and I—" He raised a hand sharply. "Don't," she cried harder. "It only happened once, I swear. But when I found out I was pregnant, I didn't know whose it was. I went to the doctor, and they said it could be either." I felt the blood drain from my face. It was like watching a house burn while still standing inside it. Caleb was shaking, his voice raw. "So you lied about being infertile to hide the fact that you were pregnant, and not even sure it was mine?" Alyssa sobbed uncontrollably. "I thought I could fix it. I thought if I kept it quiet long enough, it wouldn't matter. I was terrified of losing you." He stepped back, his breath uneven. "You already did." He turned toward the door, but I moved between them. "Caleb," he stopped, his eyes glassy with disbelief. "I can't, Mom. I can't even look at her right now." And then he was gone. Out the door. Into the rain. Alyssa sank to the floor, crying into her hands. I stood there for what felt like hours, staring at the doorway, hearing the faint echo of his footsteps fading into the storm. Then, quietly, I knelt beside her. "Does he know who the other man is?" I asked softly. She shook her head, still sobbing. "No, and I pray he never finds out." I looked down at her, at the girl who had turned my family into a house of glass. And yet, even in that moment, I couldn't bring myself to hate her completely. Because somewhere inside me, I saw the reflection of a younger version of myself. One who'd once lied out of fear, too. But love built on fear doesn't survive the rain. That night, I sat awake in the dark, the rain tapping softly against the window. I wanted to believe there was still a way to fix things. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure what fixing even meant. Because sometimes truth doesn't heal. It just clears the fog so you can finally see how broken everything already was. The rain didn't stop for 3 days after that night. It drummed against the roof like a heartbeat that refused to calm down. Every time I tried to close my eyes, I'd see Caleb's face, pale, trembling, eyes full of a pain no mother ever wants to see in her child. He didn't call. Didn't text. Didn't answer when I tried reaching out. The silence between us was heavier than anger. By the 4th day, I drove to his apartment. I'd told myself it was just to check on him, but the truth was I couldn't stand not knowing. The hallway smelled faintly of detergent and rain. His door was slightly open. I knocked gently. "Caleb?" He appeared from the living room, eyes sunken, hair messy, still wearing the same hoodie he'd had on the night he left. "Mom," he said quietly. "You shouldn't be here." I stepped inside anyway. I needed to see you. The apartment looked like it had been frozen mid-breath. Papers scattered, dishes piled up, couch cushions tossed aside like someone had been pacing restlessly. "Have you eaten?" I asked. He shrugged. "Not hungry," I sighed, trying to catch his eyes. "Where's Alyssa?" He looked away. "At her friend's place. Said she needed space." I hesitated. "And you?" He exhaled, sinking onto the couch. "I don't even know what I am anymore." I sat across from him, waiting. After a long silence, he said, "Do you know what's worse than finding out someone lied to you, Mom?" I shook my head gently. "It's realizing you can't even trust your own judgment anymore." His voice cracked. "I defended her. Every time someone said she was hiding something, I told them they were wrong. I even told you to stop judging her. I wanted to tell him he'd done what people do when they love. They believe. But I stayed quiet. Sometimes truth sounds like comfort, and comfort feels like a lie." He rubbed his temples. "She swears it only happened once, that she doesn't even talk to him anymore. Do you believe her?" I asked softly. He hesitated, and in that pause I got my answer. "No," he whispered. "Not really." The room felt colder suddenly. I watched him, my heart breaking in a way words can't describe. Then he said something that made me go still. "She won't tell me who he is, but I think I already know." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. "There's a doctor she used to work with, Michael Reed. She used to mention him a lot before we got married. Said he helped her get her first internship. I didn't think much of it back then. But I found out something last night." My stomach tightened. "What?" She called him, twice, after everything happened. "I saw the call logs. Did you ask her?" He nodded. "She said she was just getting advice." I could hear the bitterness in his laugh. Advice. From the man who might be the father of her child. He looked up at me then, eyes wet but angry. "Mom, what do I do? If it's his, I can't raise that baby. I can't." I wanted to hold him, to tell him he didn't have to decide anything yet. But I also knew the truth had a way of finding its own door, no matter how long you tried to keep it locked. "Caleb," I said quietly. "You deserve honesty, whatever that costs." He nodded slowly. "That's what scares me." That evening when I got home, the house felt emptier than usual. It's strange how betrayal changes the way sound moves through a place. Like even the walls don't trust you anymore. I poured myself some tea, but before I could take a sip, my phone buzzed. It was Alyssa. Her message was short. "I need to talk to you. Alone." I stared at it for a long time before replying. "Tomorrow, noon." The next day, she arrived exactly on time. Her face looked pale, almost translucent. She wasn't wearing makeup. Her eyes were red, but there was a steadiness in them I hadn't seen before. I gestured for her to sit. She didn't. "I'm sorry," she said simply. "I know sorry doesn't fix anything, but I can't let Caleb drown in this without telling you everything." I folded my arms, bracing myself. "It wasn't supposed to happen," she began quietly. "Michael Lee, the doctor, he was my mentor. I admired him. He was older, married. It started with messages, small things. Then one night after work, we had drinks. I was lonely, Caleb was busy, and one mistake became a secret I didn't know how to bury." Her voice trembled. "When I found out I was pregnant, I panicked. Michael didn't even know. I told him once, months later, and he said he'd handle it. But by then, I was already married to Caleb." I felt my stomach twist. "Handle it? What does that mean?" She hesitated. "He wanted me to terminate the pregnancy. Said it would ruin his career. I refused. He said if I kept it, he'd make sure Caleb never found out, as long as I stayed quiet." My hands clenched around the edge of the table. "And you believed him?" "I didn't know what else to do," she cried. "I thought I could hide it. But the guilt, it's killing me. Every kick I feel reminds me that my lies are growing with it." She sat down finally, shoulders shaking. "I love your son, Mrs. Turner, I really do. But I don't know how to fix this." For a long moment, I didn't say anything. I looked at her, not the liar, Not the betrayer, but the terrified young woman sitting in front of me, crushed under her own mistakes. There was a time in my life when I too had chosen silence over truth. I'd told Caleb once that his father and I had separated because of work stress. That wasn't the full story. There had been another woman, and I'd stayed quiet, thinking it would protect him. But lies, no matter how pure the reason, always leave stains. You can't fix this by hiding, I said softly. You have to tell him everything. All of it. Her eyes widened. He'll leave me. Maybe, I said gently. But he deserves the choice. She covered her face. I can't lose him. You already are, I whispered. The silence between us felt like a confession neither of us wanted to hear. Finally, she stood. Will you tell him? I shook my head. No, that's your burden to carry. But if you don't, I will. She nodded slowly, tears streaming down her cheeks. I'll tell him tonight. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, the moonlight falling across the floor like a cold confession. Every part of me wanted to protect Caleb from more pain. But I also knew the kind of damage silence could do. I'd lived it once. I wouldn't live it again. At 2 a.m., my phone buzzed again. A message from Caleb. She told me everything. Just 4 words. Then, another, I'm coming over. When he arrived, his face was pale, eyes hollow, his voice barely a whisper. She told me, he said. Every detail. I opened my mouth to speak, but he cut me off. She said she's leaving, going to her parents for a while. Did you ask about the baby? I asked quietly. He nodded. She said she doesn't know, that she wants a paternity test after it's born. His voice cracked. But I already know what I'll do. I frowned. What do you mean? He looked at me with a quiet resolve I hadn't seen before. No matter what the test says, I'm not abandoning that child. Tears filled my eyes. Caleb. He gave a small, broken smile. I can't let another generation drown in someone else's mistakes. Mom, I'll raise that baby, not because of her, but because I couldn't live with myself if I didn't. For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw a glimpse of the man I raised. Strong, gentle, flawed, but good. I reached for his hand. I'm proud of you. He squeezed it, eyes glistening. I don't feel proud. I just feel tired. Love always costs something, I whispered. But what you're doing, it's rare. He nodded slowly, tears running silently down his face. And in that quiet moment, I realized something I'd forgotten long ago. Sometimes forgiveness doesn't come at the end of a story. Sometimes it's the first step toward surviving it. The morning Alyssa left, the sky was gray, not the kind that threatens rain, but the kind that feels like it's already cried all night. I watched through my window as Caleb helped her load the last suitcase into the back of her car. She didn't look back once. Her belly was showing more now, round, undeniable. It was the kind of sight that should have made a mother smile. Instead, it made me ache. Caleb stood there long after the car disappeared down the street. He looked lost, like a man watching the life he built crumble one quiet piece at a time. When he finally came inside, he said only one thing. She's gone. I nodded slowly, not asking where. I already knew she'd gone back to her parents' place in Ohio. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at his hands. I told her I'll still help when the baby comes. That I'll be there. That's good, I said gently. He nodded, then whispered, But Mom, people are starting to talk. Small towns have big mouths, and in ours, silence is just the space between gossip. By the end of the week, people at church had started asking quiet questions. How's Caleb holding up? I heard Alyssa isn't living with him anymore. Everything okay? Is it true the baby might not be his? The questions were always wrapped in concern, but the curiosity underneath was sharp and hungry. I'd smile politely, say something vague like, they're working things out, and then change the subject. But one Sunday, after service, I overheard 2 women whispering near the back pew. One of them said, I heard she was seeing that doctor from the clinic before she got married. The other replied, Michael Reed? The one who moved to Columbus? My cousin said he's denying everything. Their voices dropped lower, But the damage was done. That night, I called Caleb. He answered on the third ring, sounding exhausted. "Hey, Mom, we need to talk," I said. "It's about the rumors." He was silent for a moment. "I know. I've been getting calls from friends. Even my boss pulled me aside." "What did you say?" "The truth," he said simply. "That I don't know. That I'll find out when the baby's born." He paused, then added quietly, "And that whatever the result is, I'll still be a father to that child." I felt a lump rise in my throat. "People won't understand that." "I know," he said. "But I'm done living for what people understand." The next few weeks blurred together. Alyssa and Caleb spoke only through short, careful messages. She went to her doctor appointments alone, though she sent him updates and ultrasound photos. He'd sit at my table sometimes, phone in hand, staring at those images, that tiny heartbeat on a screen. And I could see him fighting not to let the hope win over the hurt. "She says it's a boy," he told me one night. His voice small, like a child again. "That's wonderful," I said softly. He nodded, then whispered, "I don't even know if he's mine." I reached across the table, placing my hand over his. "Maybe that's not the point anymore," I said. He looked at me, confused. "Sometimes life gives us a child we didn't expect," I continued. "But maybe the lesson isn't about blood. Maybe it's about what we choose to love anyway." He stared at me for a long moment. And then, for the first time in weeks, he smiled. A tired, quiet, broken smile, but a real one. 2 months later, I got a call. It was Alyssa. Her voice was calm but strained. "I had the baby," my breath caught. "A boy?" She laughed softly, the sound trembling. "Yes. He's beautiful, Mrs. Turner. You should see him." Something warm and heavy filled my chest. "How's Caleb?" "Did you tell him?" "I tried," she said. But he didn't answer. "I think he's still angry. Can I come see you?" I asked. There was a long pause. "You'd do that?" "Of course." When I arrived at her parents' home, she looked different, softer, worn down, but peaceful in a way. The baby was asleep in a bassinet by the window, his tiny fingers curled into fists, his chest rising and falling with the rhythm of new life. I stood there, watching him, something inside me breaking open. He looked so small, so innocent, untouched by all the lies and pain that had brought him into the world. Alyssa watched me carefully. "Do you want to hold him?" I hesitated, then nodded. When she placed him in my arms, I felt something shift. The anger I'd been carrying for months just melted. He smelled like milk and warmth and forgiveness. For a long time, I didn't speak. I just held him, my heart catching up with the moment. Finally, I said, "He deserves the truth. All of it, when he's old enough." She nodded. "I know. Have you told Caleb?" She shook her head. "Not yet. I wanted to do the test first." I swallowed hard. "And when is that?" "Tomorrow." The next evening, Caleb came over after work, his face drawn but calm. "She called," he said quietly. "She wants me to come to the clinic for the test." I nodded. "Are you ready for that?" He thought for a long time, then said, "No, but I'll go anyway." He looked at me, his voice breaking. "Mom, what if he's not mine?" I took his hand. "Then you'll decide what kind of man you want to be, not what kind of blood runs in that baby's veins." He exhaled shakily. "You always make it sound simple." "It's not simple," I said softly. "It's just right." The day of the test came and went. A week later, the results arrived. I wasn't there when he opened the envelope, but I'll never forget the call that followed. It was late evening. The sun was setting, painting the kitchen in gold and orange. My phone rang once, twice, then I picked up. His voice was quiet, steady, too steady. "It's not mine." The words hung in the air like broken glass. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he whispered, "But I'm still going to raise him." I felt tears fill my eyes. "You sure?" "Yes," he said. He didn't ask to be born into a lie, but I can make sure he grows up in truth. My chest tightened. I'm proud of you, Caleb. He laughed softly, the sound catching in his throat. You know what's funny? I thought finding out the truth would break me, but it didn't. It freed me. I smiled, though tears rolled down my cheeks. That's what truth does, sweetheart. It doesn't always heal, but it always frees. That night, after we hung up, I sat on the porch watching the stars come out one by one. Somewhere out there, Alyssa was holding her child, and somewhere else, my son, my strong, broken, beautiful son, was learning that love isn't about what's deserved. It's about what's chosen, and maybe that was the real miracle after all. 3 months passed after the test results came in. Life had found a strange kind of quiet. Not peace exactly, but the calm that follows a storm you barely survived. Caleb visited the baby every weekend. He'd send me pictures sometimes. The boy sleeping in his arms, wrapped in a soft blue blanket. A tiny hand clutching his shirt. He never called the child his stepson. He just called him Eli. I didn't ask about Alyssa much, and he didn't volunteer details. I think we both understood that some wounds don't need to be talked about every day. They just need space to breathe. One Sunday morning, as I was folding laundry, my phone rang. It was Alyssa. "Mrs. Turner," she said, her voice steady but softer than I remembered. "I was wondering if I could come by." I hesitated for a second, then said, "Of course." When she arrived, she looked older, not in years but in spirit. Motherhood had changed her. There were dark circles under her eyes, her hair pulled back loosely, and she held a paper bag of muffins in one hand, the same kind she used to bring me years ago. I gestured for her to sit. "You look tired." She smiled faintly. "I haven't slept through a night in months." I chuckled softly. "That's motherhood for you." We sat in silence for a while before she spoke again. "I heard you know about the test." I nodded slowly. "Caleb told me." She took a deep breath. "I thought knowing the truth would destroy everything. But somehow it's made things clearer, painful, yes, but clear." I sipped my tea. Clarity can be cruel like that. She looked up at me, eyes glistening. "I came here to thank you, for not turning him against me, for not telling people what I did." I set my cup down. "Alyssa, what you did was wrong, but spreading more pain never makes things right." She nodded, wiping a tear. "I know, I'm trying to be better. For Eli." At the mention of his name, her face softened, the same way mine used to when I said Caleb's name when he was little. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded letter. "I've written a statement. I plan to file a paternity claim against Michael Reed. He's refused to acknowledge Eli, but that ends now." My breath caught. "You're going to expose him?" "Yes," she said firmly. "He thinks he can just move on, keep his spotless reputation while we live in shame. But Eli deserves his name on that birth certificate. I won't let my son grow up a secret." I studied her face. There was no fear in her eyes this time, just conviction. "You're sure about this?" I asked quietly. She nodded. "Completely." I looked down at my hands. "You know this will bring attention. To you. To Caleb." Her voice trembled, but she didn't waver. "Then so be it. I've hidden long enough." The next day, it was all over town. The local news picked it up after the court filing went public. Local doctor accused of concealing paternity scandal. I sat in my living room watching the TV, heart pounding. There was Alyssa, her face blurred for privacy, holding Eli in her arms as she walked into the courthouse. Her voice played faintly through the recording. "This isn't revenge. This is about truth." For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. It was surreal, seeing our private pain turned into a headline. The phone started ringing nonstop. Reporters, acquaintances, even church friends who pretended to just be checking in. I didn't answer any of them. When Caleb came over that night, he looked furious. "She had no right to do this without telling me first," he said. Now everyone's talking. My office, my friends, even my boss called me in. I waited for him to calm down. "She's doing what she thinks is right," I said softly. He ran a hand through his hair. "Maybe, but she's dragging us all into it," I sighed. "Sometimes the truth drags everyone through the mud before it sets them free." He looked away, jaw tight. I don't know if I can forgive her, Mom. Maybe you're not meant to, I said quietly. Forgiveness isn't an obligation. It's a choice, one you make for yourself, not for them. He nodded slightly, but his eyes were full of conflict. A week later, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, a man in a dark suit stood on my porch. He looked like he'd stepped out of a different world, polished, controlled, yet visibly shaken. Mrs. Turner? He asked. Yes. I'm Dr. Reed. I froze. I need to speak with you, he said. I hesitated, then stepped aside. Come in. He removed his coat, his movements deliberate, careful. He looked around my modest living room, the photographs, the warmth, like it was a foreign language he didn't know how to read. I didn't come here to justify what I did, he said finally. I know I've caused pain, but I want you to understand. I never meant for it to go this far. I folded my arms. You mean the part where you denied a child that might be yours? He winced. I wanted to protect my family. I raised an eyebrow. By destroying someone else's? He sighed, his mask cracking for the first time. I've made a terrible mistake. I've spoken to my lawyer. I'll take the test. If he's mine, I'll do what's right. I studied him for a moment. And what if he's not? He looked away. Then I'll live knowing I almost lost everything over a lie I helped create. I didn't reply. I just gestured to the door. Then I hope, Doctor, that when the truth comes, you're strong enough to stand under it. He nodded, eyes lowered. I'll contact Alyssa. Thank you for your time. As he turned to leave, I stopped him. You know, I said quietly, people think love is ruined by lies. But most times it's ruined by cowardice. He paused, his shoulders tensing, then walked out into the night without another word. A few weeks later, the results came. Eli was his. Alyssa called me first. She was crying, not from relief, but from exhaustion. It's over, she said softly. He's agreed to acknowledge Eli. He'll pay support. But I don't want his money. What do you want, Alyssa? I asked gently. Peace, she whispered. For me. For Caleb. For my son. That weekend Caleb came to see me. He looked different. Tired but lighter somehow. She told me about the results, he said. I nodded. And? I told her I'm done. There was no anger in his tone, just finality. I'll still be there for Eli, he said quietly. But I can't keep living in a story built on her lies. I need to start writing my own. I felt tears sting my eyes. Where will you start? He smiled faintly. Maybe by finally forgiving myself for not seeing the truth sooner. That night, as I sat alone on my porch, I thought about everything that had happened. The lies, the heartbreak, the revelations. And I realized something simple. Something I wished I'd known years ago when I was younger. Softer and more afraid of truth than pain. Sometimes, the greatest act of love isn't holding someone close. It's letting them go, so they can learn who they are without the shadows of your forgiveness covering them. The sky was clear that night. For the first time in a long time, the stars didn't look like reminders of what I'd lost. They looked like what I still had. Hope. A full year passed after everything came to light. A year of endings that slowly turned into beginnings. Not the kind that shout their arrival, but the kind that slip in quietly, like the first light after a storm. The town had long since moved on. People found new gossip, new lives to dissect. The scandal that once felt like the end of our world was now just another story folded into the town's collective memory. Half remembered, half forgotten. But for us, the people who lived it, the echoes lingered. Caleb moved into a small house on the edge of town, just a modest place with peeling white paint, a small garden and a porch that faced the sunrise. He said he liked waking up early now, said the quiet made him feel reset. He visited me every Sunday for lunch, and sometimes he'd bring Eli along. Yes, Eli. Even though the world had learned whose blood ran through that little boy's veins, Caleb never stopped being his father. He never said it out loud, but I think Eli became his way of proving to the world, and to himself, that compassion doesn't need permission. The The first time he brought Eli after everything, I wasn't sure what to expect. The boy was only 8 months old then, chubby cheeks, bright eyes, always reaching for things he shouldn't. When Caleb placed him in my arms, something inside me softened in a way I didn't know it still could. Eli giggled, that belly-deep baby laughter that shakes the air. And in that sound, I didn't hear scandal or shame or betrayal. I heard hope. As months went on, things started settling into a new rhythm. Alyssa still lived out of state, working part-time while raising Eli. Her lawsuit had forced Dr. Reed to resign quietly, and though she could have taken him for everything he had, she didn't. "I don't want revenge," she told me once on the phone. "I just want to stop looking over my shoulder." She'd grown too, older in spirit, like someone who'd finally made peace with the ghosts in her mirror. She called occasionally, never to ask for forgiveness, but to check on how Caleb was doing. She said she wanted Eli to know love from both sides of his story, not just one, and somehow that felt right. One evening, Caleb came over just before sunset. He brought Eli, who was now walking, unsteady but determined, the way all little boys are when they're learning how to balance in a world too big for their legs. I was sitting on the porch, watching the sky turn shades of gold and rose. Caleb handed me a cup of coffee and sat beside me. For a while, neither of us spoke. We just watched Eli toddle around the yard, chasing the light. Finally, he said, "You know, I used to think forgiveness was a prize, something you give to people who earn it." I smiled faintly. "And now?" He took a slow sip, staring ahead. "Now I think it's a way of letting go. Not for them, for me," I nodded. "That's wisdom, not age, speaking." He chuckled softly. "You sound like Dad." That made me smile, though it stung a little too. "He'd be proud of you, you know." He looked down. "You think so?" "I know so," I said quietly. "Because you became the kind of man who didn't let bitterness make him small." He exhaled slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I used to wake up every morning angry at her. Angry at myself. Angry at God. But then one day I realized that anger wasn't protecting me. It was eating me alive." I reached over, touching his hand gently. "You learned the hardest lesson there is, that healing doesn't come from justice. It comes from surrender," he nodded. "You sound like you've learned it too." I smiled faintly, watching Eli stumble and laugh in the grass. "Maybe I have." That night, after they left, I sat by the window. The same one I'd sat by the night I first texted, "We need to talk." Only now the silence didn't ache. It soothed. I thought about everything that had happened, how lies had broken us, truth had burned us, and yet somehow, in the ashes, something gentler had grown. Love. Not the loud, cinematic kind that fills the room with music, but the quiet kind. The kind that forgives without forgetting. The kind that stays, even when it has every reason to leave. A few months later, on Eli's first birthday, Alyssa came back to town. It was awkward at first. The three of us, me, Caleb, and her, standing in my living room, surrounded by balloons and the smell of vanilla frosting. But Eli was too busy smearing cake on his face to notice the history sitting around him. Alyssa handed Caleb a small gift bag. "For him," she said. Inside was a silver frame with a picture of the three of them. Eli in Caleb's arms, Alyssa beside him. The caption read, "Family is what we choose to keep." Caleb stared at it for a long time, then nodded. "Thank you," he said simply. No tears, no apologies, just quiet acknowledgement. Sometimes that's enough. After everyone left that night, I stood in the empty kitchen cleaning frosting off the counter. And as I wiped away the sticky traces of celebration, I realized how symbolic it felt. Wiping away the past, piece by piece, but never pretending it hadn't happened, because scars don't disappear. They just stop hurting when you touch them. Months later, I started volunteering at a local women's support group. Women who had been betrayed, left behind, or burdened by secrets. When they shared their stories, I listened, and every time one of them said, "I'll never forgive him," I would smile softly and reply, "Maybe not today. But someday you'll forgive yourself, and that's where it begins." Sometimes, when I look at Eli playing on my porch, I think about how strange life is, how it gives us pain, dresses it up as loss, and then hides grace inside it. If none of this had happened, maybe Caleb would never have learned the depth of love he was capable of. Maybe Alyssa would never have found her strength. And maybe I would never have found mine. The truth didn't heal us instantly. It tore us apart first. But in tearing us apart, it showed us what was real, what was worth saving. So if you ask me now what I learned from all this, I'd say this: sometimes forgiveness doesn't sound like I forgive you. Sometimes it sounds like I understand. And understanding, even when it hurts, is the closest thing we'll ever get to peace. That night, as I turned off the lights, I whispered a quiet prayer. Not for things to be perfect, not for the past to change, just gratitude. For the lesson, for the love that survived it, and for the little boy whose laughter had somehow stitched all our broken pieces back together.